Welcome to Parenting Teens, the podcast where we navigate the ups and downs of raising teenagers. As founders of Ramp Nutritional Products for Teens, we're real parents going through the same challenges, and we bring on experts to offer unique insights and inspiration. Join our community and know you're not alone in your struggles. Oh my goodness. Welcome, Julia, to the Parenting Teens podcast. We're so excited
Thank
to
you
have
for
you
having
here
me.
today.
Yay.
So two funny things happened before we started recording. Simona has a little bit of a cold and it's almost the summertime, which is never fun. So, that's that. But the other, Julie, you talked about feeling a bit terrified as your kids are getting older. So I want to make sure we kind of put a pin in that because we celebrated what I felt like was a milestone birthday for our younger son yesterday. Yep. He just turned 13 and
Yes.
it brought me all the feels because now I have officially 2 teenagers. So I feel like what we're talking about today is really timely and hopefully is going to be really enlightening for both Simona and I and for our audience. So I'm really excited to dig in today. But first, I want to tell our audience a little bit about you and your area of expertise. So Julie is the director of Attune Families, a child and family therapy practice which is located here in Toronto, Canada. Attune Families provides evidence-based support to children and families struggling with relationships, big emotions, which we know in our household, big emotions and social and behavioral challenges. Julia is also a public speaker and provides training and consultation to schools and has contributed to media such as the New York Times and Celebrity Parents magazine. So we are so honored to have you here today to talk a little bit about attachment parenting and what that looks like as our kids get a bit older, because I think, at least I can speak for myself, it's a concept that I heard a lot when my kids were little and I was carrying them around everywhere and they were in a carrier or on my back or on my body somehow. And that concept has sort of fizzled away from my personal life as my kids have gotten older. And I haven't really thought about parenting through that lens. So I'm wondering if maybe we start with you. I mean, we don't need, I'm sure we can't cover all of attachment parenting, but maybe if you can kind of just orient us and ground us a little bit in what it is and yeah, maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah. And so I think the really important place to start is to sort of distinguish between attachment theory, which is very, very well researched over many, many, many years, very well established, and parenting to foster healthy attachment versus what was really popularized probably when our kids were little, especially, which is sort of like the Dr. Sears branded version of attachment parenting, which sort of dictates that I think there was the 7 B's, so I won't get all of them, but baby wearing, extended breastfeeding, co-sleeping, and that really focused on proximity to your kids, which is an important piece of attachment, fostering healthy attachment. The thing is that the science doesn't tell us that there is one set of behaviors that is going to guarantee healthy attachment. And in the absence of the behaviors that Dr. Sears was really trying to promote, there can also be healthy attachment. So the reality is that attachment is very much a psychological process. It's a very complex process. And the way I like to explain it to parents is there's a reason that our practice is called Attuned Families, because you can be in proximity to your little one and sleeping with them and carrying them and breastfeeding them, and very attuned and responsive, because being attuned and responsive is what we know promotes attachment. But you can also do all of those behaviors in a very sleep-deprived, moody, disconnected haze, which, let's be honest, we've all been there, at least part of it, especially if you're co-sleeping, breastfeeding, and bring your baby everywhere with you. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to have a healthy attachment if there's some of that. But it is at least part of the time being able to be attuned and responsive that will foster the development of that healthy attachment relationship. And then every baby's different, temperament is different. So there's also a really important piece around goodness of fit. So like, what are your needs versus what are your baby's needs? So a lot of what really and truly and deeply promotes healthy attachment is our own self-reflection, our own support and self-care, if I dare use the term self-care. I know that it has many interpretations. And the needs that our baby is bringing to the table. So it's actually a really, really complex process. And most of the time, parents who are showing up with the intention of fostering healthy attachment, they do enough to have a healthy attachment relationship. But when your kids are little, it's hard when we get to this age, because when they're little, you can just pick them up and rock them. And like, it's exhausting and it's draining, and they wake you up at 5 a.m. or in the middle of the night. And, you know, there's like a constant revolving door of illnesses, and it's so hard in the one way. But on the other hand, you can kind of solve everything just by kind of being there and picking them up and being attuned and present. Then when they get to this age, it gets a lot harder in a way. It gets easier in the one way, but harder in the other way. So I feel every stage is just easier and harder. Like you've never really arrived in parenting. And as soon as you feel like you've got this and you've mastered it, something else comes up. They throw you a curveball, and you have to go back to the drawing board and figure it out again. So
I love how you explained that, and you know, it brings back these memories to my older son, and I was like, you know, 1,000% attachment parent, like going for it, and he hated the baby carrier and loved the stroller. And I was like, with all my like crunchy mom friends, and everyone's, you know, got their babies in the carrier, and I'm like, my son likes the stroller. Everyone kind of like looks at me, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm pushing.
That was the thing. I remember that. You're pushing your baby away from you if you're pushing them in a stroller. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what you were doing is you were dialed into what your child was feeling and needing, and you were responding to that need. He was ready to look around and explore the world. Maybe he runs hot, and he was really hot in the carrier. You know, you really need to follow your intuition and your instincts as a parent. And this is why it becomes problematic to prescribe certain behaviors to parents. Like, there's, of course, certain behaviors that are off limits, like abusive behaviors, right? But to prescribe a certain set of behaviors for parents and then have parents feel like if they're not doing those things, they're failing their child that's just a recipe for disaster, really. And I was the opposite. I had in a group of moms who were very like, I'm sleep training, and I was more crunchy granola attachment-y mom, where I was like, that will be a failed experiment if I attempt that. So I'm just going to keep waking up and co-sleeping and somehow get through this. And then I felt also like not super connected to some of the moms I was hanging around, which was also hard, because they're like, well, you made your bed, right? But at the end of the day, you have to do you. You have to know your kid and know yourself and do what feels right.
Yeah.
Can I ask a clarification question about attachment? Or is it, I mean, you just said really nicely before, you know, just as you feel like you get to one stage and you sort of understand it and feel like you've got your legs with it, you know, the sands shift under your feet and you're kind of at the new level of not knowing what's going on. And maybe, I don't know if I have this question fully teased out in my own mind, but is attachment, like, is there an age where it's done? I mean,
No.
Again, I imagine that there's always opportunities to connect and attune to your child, but is there like this magic window where you kind of have blown it if you haven't fostered that connection adequately? I know I'm not sure exactly. Do you know what
is it ever too late?
Is it ever too late?
Okay, so I think that's two questions. The first being like, do you outgrow the need for attachment relationships? No, you have an attachment relationship. If you have a spouse or a partner who you're in an intimate relationship with, that's an attachment relationship too. I don't believe that it's ever too late. I have seen amazing transformations happen in families. Mm-hmm. I am also a huge advocate for prevention and early intervention, because it's a lot harder to intervene at later stages. It's going to take more work. It's going to take more time. And you might not sort of reach the same goals all the way that you were hoping to reach, right? Whereas if you're looking at things preventively, like parents are up against a lot. One thing that I didn't say is none of us are set up in like Western civilized culture to successfully foster healthy attachment relationships in our families.
Yeah.
We have to be conscious about it because we are working against so many barriers. So we have a lot of families that come in to us who are like, what are we doing wrong? Like, how do we have these problems? Like, many of them have privilege. Many of them have a lot of time with their kids. Maybe not as much as they would like to, but they have a lot of the things that you would think would help. But also many of us are coming to the table dealing with intergenerational trauma, a lot of stressful work demands. We do typically separate from our kids from a very young age, like developmentally speaking. It's not considered young in our culture, but developmentally, a lot of kids aren't just necessarily ready to separate for the length of time that they do at the age that they do. We live in a very behaviorist society where, the expectations on kids and on us to sort of get our kids to meet are not developmentally appropriate. So then there's a disconnect between our expectations of our kids and their behavior, and then that creates frustration and disconnect. So it's actually not easy. Sorry, I got totally off track there.
No. I think you were doing a great job of answering the question or what I'm hearing from you is you believe that it's never too late, that there's a lot of opportunities, and that it takes extra work because of how a lot of us the environment that we're in.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm big on prevention. Sure. Yeah. And early intervention, because it's so much easier on families. Right. But no, I don't believe that we work with families with 67-year-old parents with grown kids who no longer live in the home to repair relationships. Like it's really, a relationship is a relationship. There can always be progress and repair. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
And actually the repair is a big part of what builds healthy attachment. We actually I'm not suggesting that you go out and look for ways to rupture your relationship with your child. You will come upon them very honestly.
Yes.
But that experience of like there being a rupture and a repair actually strengthens that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And just to even clarify it further, and maybe this is evident, but just to sort of make it even more obvious, healthy attachment looks, I don't mean to say looks like what, because I know you're not, it doesn't sound to me like you're advocating prescribing certain behaviors, but I don't want to say outcome, but is it, emotional self-regulation, healthy sleep? Like what are, I don't want to say why should people care about this, but what does it look like? And what does it mean?
Yeah. So the benefits of healthy attachment relationships are it's a real protective factor against later mental health and relationship problems, addictions. Even there's a belief that a lot of, quote unquote, physical or autoimmune illnesses are linked back to early childhood trauma or, problematic attachment patterns. What does a kid who is securely attached look like? Let me see if I can do this justice. I think what we're looking for is that secure base. So it's not that the child won't have behaviors, although having healthy attachment relationship does reduce problematic behaviors. But I also want to just acknowledge that like kids who are born, kids who are neurodiverse, for example, kids who are born with big needs who aren't developing typically it'll be potentially harder to foster healthy attachment with them. But also, I don't sort of want to suggest that if you're still seeing behaviors or other concerns in a child, that necessarily means that there isn't a healthy attachment relationship. I believe that it's a great idea in those cases to focus a lot on the attachment relationship so that they have that extra secure base, because it'll be a protective factor for them and they're at risk. But I don't want anyone to listen to this and say, oh, I'm seeing this and it means that we don't have a healthy attachment relationship. Yeah. But it's that secure base. It often results in kids feeling secure in themselves.
Yeah.
And if you work at it, my hope, because we're talking about like the teenage years, my hope is that when kids go out into the world, they have us in their minds, and they hear us when they're going to make a decision. They hear what we would say. They've sort of internalized a working model of us and they've internalized our value set. And so, I mean, the hope is that we remain more influential than their peers. And also, hopefully, they choose friends who fit their values as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful for me. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I wonder if that's a really good segue into the question that we got from our community, since you just touched on teens. So maybe Simona, if you want to pull that question up, that would be great.
Yeah, so the question is, I've been practicing attachment parenting since my kids were little, but as they become tweens and teens, everything seems to be changing, and I'm not sure what attachment parenting looks like as they get more independent.
Yes. And this is probably also a good time for me to be totally transparent and say that I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I am pretty apprehensive about the years to come.
We all are.
We all are. Yes. Welcome to the club.
And also because of my work, I've seen all the ways it can go sideways. So I'm just sort of extra aware of that. And I really hope that the time that I've put in the early years is going to really pay off. I hope. But I'm still going to parent teenagers. Still processing that. So how does it change? It changes in that it changes and it doesn't change. So like when they're little, like we talk a lot about wait, watch, and wonder, and being sort of there and watching them and trying to tune into them, and being available for connection when they need connection. And so with teenagers, Tina Fey did this interview and it was so funny. She was like, it's kind of like dating or when she had a crush on a boy, where she would basically just sort of like sit in waiting for any opportunity to be like, oh, you want to talk to me? Oh, wow. Okay. So, right.
That's
so
100% my move with my 15-year-old. I'm just,
good
I'm here.
move.
I am here when you text me, I text you.
So I'm just going to like sit here with, yes. So it's like wherever you can just like wait for the opportunities for connection and be available. Maybe not so eager that they're like, oh, and you get the eye roll and they want to get further away from you. But like,
I know I can be a little cringe. I can be a little cringe. I've been told.
My gosh, me too. I've now officially started embarrassing my daughter, which I'm very proud of. I feel like that's a milestone in parenthood. But like, love them fiercely, love them through everything they're throwing at you, which is really hard. And I think, honestly, a big piece of that is having a good support system. Like, I know for me, it's going to be like parenting. Obviously, like my whole life is about parenting. I work with parents. And it's because I had a harder time when they were little, and I retrained and I got really passionate about this approach to family therapy and to parenting, to raising kids. And I, as many parents do, I really wanted my kids to have a different upbringing than I did. And so a lot of my identity is tied up in parenting. And I am actually going to really have to work through some stuff when my kids are needing me less. And so that while I'm sitting around waiting for opportunities for connection, I'm not doing it from this like really anxious, hypervigilant state where I have no other purpose, right?
Right.
I'm going to have to really find rediscover the things that I'm passionate about outside of being around for my kids, and also find things that we enjoy together as a family. So the things that I think will really help are making sure there's still quality family time. I would really have boundaries around screens. I'm a real fan of having boundaries around screen time, and that's definitely something to start early if you can. And but if it's too late for that, it really is a battle. I call it battle worth fighting. I say to my kids, I'm not fighting with you over your iPad. I am fighting with your iPad over you. Like, copyright that.
Yeah.
But it is worth the effort to stay connected to your kids. And so it is some sitting and waiting. It's finding the things that they like, taking an interest in their lives. And it's also respecting their autonomy and respecting their opinions and listening to them and giving them some agency. And I will say that if your approach in the earlier years has been sort of like a power over approach where it's like my house, my rules, my consequences, I would recommend really working on strengthening and repairing relationships and starting to parent through collaboration and relationship, because that approach to parenting tends to stop working in the teenage years, because they stop caring. They get defended against they put up defenses against your consequences, and it just pushes them farther and farther away. So you want to do what you can to keep them close and connected and to feel valued and feel good. And you need to be able to validate their emotions and also acknowledge that, like, you're holding onto the relationship with them. At the same time, it's their job right now to individuate and to find themselves and identify themselves and maybe push back against you as part of that process. And so it's like, how can you stay centered through that process? For me, it's going to take work and support.
Yes. Yeah. Work and support. I think that's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you said a few things you even talked about from when they were younger, but it does feel like it applies in a different way when they're older, the wait, watch, and wonder. And then the part of that, I'm not sure if the wonder is part of that taking an interest, but I found that I don't want to call it a shortcut or a shorthand to connect with our older son is, and I don't want to say feigning an interest because that sounds fake, but just like showing interest in what he's interested in. It's like the most chatty he'll be if we talk about something that he likes. It's the most engaged. It's, it's probably screens and social media is a whole separate conversation we just can't have today. But based on that, now he sends me stuff from TikTok and Instagram that are on that topic, and so it's like, I'll take it. Like, I'll take the time.
Absolutely.
I'll tell sharing memes with me and stuff. I'm like, okay, this is it. This is what we're getting now. And it kind of feels like it's been on his terms, but I'm meeting him there. And
100%.
Yeah. But as you said, work and support.
Yeah. And maybe one day one of those text messages is like, hey, I'm going to, like, maybe he likes baseball. Hey, I'm going to watch baseball at the park this evening. Do you want to come? Right? And maybe you're using that as a bridge. But yeah, any line that they're opening up for connection, jump on it. And it's going to be on their terms. That doesn't mean they're ruling everything. They still need limits and boundaries. But in a perfect world, you can sit down and agree on what those limits and boundaries reasonably should be. If you have successfully fostered healthy relationships in the younger years, you should have space and the opportunity to sit down together and be collaborative and have the conversation about, you know what, it makes total sense that you're going to want more independence and that you're not going to, necessarily always want to check in with me and go do your own thing and whatnot. And, I'm still your parent. I still need to know what you're up to, where you are. You still need to be home at a reasonable time. What feels fair to you? And kind of negotiate that. but really not from an authoritarian place, because they are just designed to push back on authority at this age. And so just really from a collaborative place, but still holding your position as the caregiver. So like, instead of like, I'm in charge of you, I'm responsible for you. I love you and I care about you, and it's my job. And sometimes I have to do things that you don't like. And if I didn't love you, I wouldn't bother to do those things. But I do love you, and I'm going to keep you safe, and I'm going to make sure that you have the tools that you need to like do life later. And so let's all get on the same page about what that can look like. And to keep having those conversations, and really to remember they're going through. So part of the wonder, right, is, and I'm totally stealing a concept from the younger years and applying it to, this isn't a real thing, I'm just making this up. But I think it's fair to apply it. I think it makes sense. But part of the wonder is, what are they going through? What are they going through developmentally? Because their brain development is exploding right now. And the parts of their brain that are really developing right now, like the energy is going to places that can undermine their ability to necessarily be organized and have good executive function. Like they regress a little bit in a way in favor of this huge explosion of brain development. They need sleep at times that our school system doesn't support them to sleep. That's hard. Like it's hard to be a teenager. And there are tons and tons of pressures too, like what climate are our kids going through their adolescent years in. So that's the wondering, really tuning into their experience. And when they're having a hard time and you can speak to what they're going through, that's really powerful for fostering that connection. And it's really also powerful for building their emotional intelligence and helping them to develop in the ways that you want to see them develop.
I love that. Thank you.
This has been so helpful, and I feel like I've kind of shifted a little bit of the way I'm thinking about attachment parenting. I think that you've reoriented how I'm thinking about it in terms of, it's not prescriptive behaviors, it's about attuning, it's about being responsive, meeting their needs, meeting your own needs, but also being really responsive and kind of honoring their growth and development, which feels also really respectful.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so
I
much,
think it's
Julia.
also worth mentioning, just before we wrap up,
Of course, yeah.
It's Mental Health Month.
Yes.
It was Children's Mental Health Week. It was lots of recognition happening around mental health. And one of the statistics we posted on is that 70% of mental health problems have their onset in childhood or adolescence. And it typically takes an average of 11 years for a child to receive treatment from the onset of symptoms of mental health problems. So I think the other thing that makes parenting teens harder is that we don't have good systems in place for early recognition of mental health problems. And so I think it is worth considering as parents, if you're seeing mood issues and behavior issues that you instinctively feel are above and beyond typical teenager development, I really think it's worth looking into that further, because you may be parenting a teen who is also struggling with mental health problems, and addressing those will also really help the relationship and your kid and your family.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for saying
I think that's a great reminder. So thank you.
Yeah.
As we wrap up our episode for today, we'd like to put to you the question that we ask all of our guests. We've sort of talked about this a fair bit on this recording, but I'm going to ask for you to draw from your own, if you're comfortable, drawing from your own experience with your own kids, and would love to know about one action that you do with your 11 and 8 or both year old children that you use to further foster connection with them. Something sort of tangible and actionable that might inspire another family.
I'll focus on two. The first is validate. So if I'm saying something and my daughter is saying that's not fair, instead of arguing that it is fair because of all this logic, I do my best to validate and say, oh, it doesn't feel fair to you because this wasn't what we did last time, and you weren't expecting this, and you see a lot of reasons why it should not be this way. And that makes sense. And so I validate that. It doesn't change the limit that I've set. It just creates space for her views and her feelings. So I think that's really, really powerful and important, and really fosters connection and healthy development. And the other is giggles. Wherever we can find the giggles, then the other thing that's coming to my mind, so I'm going to give you lots, but is asserting myself. Like, I go after the connection sometimes. We're like, ugh, whatever, and I will just be like, I don't care, you're adorable, get over here, and like, within reason, I will insert myself in their lives at choice moments, which I think shows them that I'll work for it. They don't have to, and that is such a relief for kids.
I love that. I've actually never heard someone say that before, and I really like it, and I can see how it's a relief for kids. Thank you, Julia.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Parenting Teens podcast. And if people want to learn more about your work, or have questions, or want to reach out, where can people find you on social media, website, etc.?
So we have physical locations in the Junction and Bloor West Village for in-person services, and we provide virtual services all over Ontario and also in BC. So we provide parent coaching, family therapy, and child therapy, and you can find out more about us at attunedfamilies.com.
That's great.
Thanks for tuning in to Parenting Teens. We hope you found today's episode informative and helpful. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you want to dive deep into teen-related resources, visit our website at drinkramp.com. Do you have a teen-related question? Drop it on SpeakPipe at speakpipe.com/parenting teens. As always, we're here to support you on your parenting journey. Until next time.